Welcome. I am so happy to see you all here at our session 3C, Embracing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, in classroom through storytelling. We have here with us today Drs. Emad, Rahim, Darrell, Norman, Burrell, and Terence Duncan from Bellevue University. Pardon the glasses here. There are a couple of notes for this meeting. We do have right here, as you notice, this meeting is being recorded, this session, and we also are going to have transcription. If you look at the bottom, you should be able to see that there. If that is annoying, you can disable it for yourself. We also will take a look at the transcription and caption it properly so that we can then present it to all of you later on after we curate all of the recordings. We will encourage that you use the chat to ask questions. Our panelists are going to leave a little bit of buffer at the end of the session to answer these questions. And I will put in a Padlet link so that you can all participate in that. Towards the end, I will also give you some social media links. And what's the last thing I needed to tell you all? Oh, just have fun. This is going to be an excellent session. So I'm going to go ahead and pass on the mic to Dr. Emad Rahim. And,
thank you, Monica. All right. Good morning for those in the West Coast and good afternoon for everybody here in the East Coast. Thank you for joining us. Our topic is on embracing DEI in the classroom through storytelling, right? And storytelling means different things to different people, but often we forget it's a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool that allows students to share their real world experiences, but also connect the curriculum with more tangible, relevant examples, right? How to apply theory in the practice, and also a way to even out the playing field, right? And I got two great fellows here with me. They all, very close friends, but also colleagues, and they have done an exceptional job in providing best practices in storytelling, integrating storytelling, not just as a resource for students, but ways to allow students to kind of share their personal experiences, integrated with lectures, case studies, but also as a way to kind of tie and weave everything in and make it more relevant and current. So my first panelist is Dr. Duncan. Can you share a little bit about yourself, where you're located, where you teach at, and some examples of how you use storytelling?
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Terence Duncan, and I'm in the St. Louis, Missouri area. And I'm an instructor at Liberty University, where I am the subject matter expert in healthcare economics. And as far as storytelling is concerned, from a diversity perspective, what I do is that I try to incorporate many real world examples for students to be able to consider to address as they're completing their projects, responding to discussion questions, and to give them the tools to be better leaders out in the world.
Our second panelist, Dr. Dale Burrell, all the way from Virginia. Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Dr. Dale Burrell. I'm currently working as faculty at Florida Institute of Technology and Capital Technology University. I've been teaching on and off for about 22 years. Before I worked in academia full-time, I worked in the federal government in training and development. And so I'm probably an interdisciplinary scholar, probably one of the most unlikely people you'll meet as a professor, in that I've navigated a lot of challenges to get here. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we engage and interact with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burrell. So we're going to start off with you, since you just shared a little bit about yourself. Now, often when it comes to entering the classroom for the first time, whether it's online or it's in person, it's trying to break that ice, right? Trying to connect students with other students, but also with yourself as a faculty. So how do you use storytelling to engage students right away, to get them involved, to get them interacting, to get them engaged in the subject matter?
I think the important thing is to be able to tell your own story. I think a lot of professors come into class with hubris as if they're the only ones that have information and their job is to impart people with no knowledge as to all their wisdom. I think your job is really to facilitate and really facilitate a discussion, and a discussion in an environment that makes people feel comfortable and safe. And the way I always start is I tell people, I struggled. You know, I went to 4 schools before I got my undergraduate degree. It took me 10 years and 3 programs before I got my doctorate. And then I later found out in life I had undiagnosed learning disabilities. But in households of color, we weren't getting you tested for dyslexia or getting you tested for ADHD. You know, your parents were just like, well, you're not applying yourself, you're not trying. And so to me, as an evolutionary process, I had to create my own coping mechanism to be successful. And I failed several times before I had my breakthrough. And I always tell people I'm an unlikely professor to sit in front of you because I struggled so bad. And then now I'm a person with a bachelor's degree, 5 masters and 2 doctorates. And I told that to say, you know, people are in their own world thinking they're the only ones that struggle. But if you explain to them your own story as a professor, that it wasn't easy for you and the things that you had to endure to get there, then automatically you create that bond that they can identify with that maybe they didn't identify with when they saw these credentials and things by your name, you know, when the class was getting ready to start.
So what you are sharing is the power of being vulnerable, right? Because often professors, we forget that our titles, our position can be very intimidating, right? And it makes it difficult for students to reach out to us, especially on the first few days in the semester, and they're trying to find their way on campus. They're trying to understand the curriculum. They're trying to get to know students, but they can see us as faculty as intimidating people, which makes it difficult for them to reach out and ask for help, raise their hands when they have questions and things like that. But you sharing a little bit about yourself right away makes you vulnerable, allows students to see you as a human being, right? Which also creates a level of engagement that's more personable. What about you, Dr. Duncan? Do you have anything to add on to this?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thank you for the question. So the way that I look at it is that I tried to introduce early on my approach towards teaching, and then also, like Dr. Burrell, provide more of an era relatability. And I think that really helps a lot of students because with me teaching at a conservative faith-based institution, you know, you have somewhat of this ideology about how things are going to be approached. And so what I actually do is that I encourage people to express themselves as long as it's, you know, mindful and courteous and respectful of others. Because I think that for us to talk about the diversity of thought, we have to be able to encourage our students to be able to express themselves in a way, as long as it's also supported by research as it relates to our projects and some of our discussion questions. And for myself personally, like Dr. Burrell and like yourself too, Dr. Rahim, I had a very unique background where, you know, because of my interest was not aligned at the particular time when I was going to school, I actually flunked out of school twice. I was working, but I didn't prioritize education like the way I should. And then so I went through non-traditional learning methods and accomplished my doctorate. And even still, there's areas where I know that I still try to work on to improve. But one thing that I also do too is never forget where I come from. You know, I'm one of the second person in my family to have a doctorate degree, my mother being the first. And my family both have, they grew up in poverty. And so when I do go back to those neighborhoods where I spend time with my family, I have to understand, like Dr. Burrell was saying, you know, the titles are great, but we also have to remember who we are from our core, because that really that will really elevate what our education is really about. And also for those who might be able to relate to that particular story, you never know if they're going to be that person that could be the next Dr. Duncan, Dr. Rahim, or Dr. Burrell from overcoming their personal circumstances and believing that they can overcome adversity to become the best person that they ever could be.
So right away, by sharing our own stories, you know, as faculty members, we automatically create this meaningful connection with students. So when we think of storytelling, we often look at it from, you know, what the students are bringing, right? What our guest lectures are bringing, or what the case study is bringing. We often forget the power that we could bring into the classroom by sharing our own lived experiences, our own professional experiences, right? Providing, you know, theory into practice, right? We're going to say this over and over again. And I think what is what is powerful is that both Dr. Duncan and Dr. Burrell, they are not just focused on one type of concentration or specialization, right? When we talk about tools in the classroom, when it comes to storytelling, it may only tie with entrepreneurship. It may only tie with healthcare. It may only tie to engineering, right? So when we think of certain methodologies, certain pedagogy, right? But we often forget that storytelling is more broad, right? So anyone could apply it and use it to engage students, to bring that curriculum to life. So Dr. Duncan, going back to you, you have been creative in regards to how you bring stories in and when do you bring stories in. So do you weave stories into your classroom while you're developing the curriculum, or does it evolve while you're teaching in the class?
Oh, good question. So the way that the Liberty program is set up is that the class is already set up in the structure that they would prefer. And then so what I do is I provide my personal touch within it, which has actually received a lot of great reviews, not only from the student, but from the faculty as well. And so what I do again is that I just try to put a little bit more of my personality and just really encourage them to find out who they are and make that connection from the theory, the practice, and then from their own perspective. And so even though I'm teaching healthcare, and I do different disciplines as far as writing and producing different content, I think it's really interesting when you do challenge them to, some of the questions, the probing questions, and ask them, what do you think about this particular thing about minority healthcare disparities or improving, mental health in African-American populations, especially if they're not African-American. I think it's really interesting to hear the perspective. And for me, I learn from my students as well. So it comes again from not just saying, well, I'm elevated at this particular position. I actually feel like I need to get down almost at a similar level with them so I can be able to find that connection with them so they can be able to relate to me, and then I can be able to relate to them as I'm evaluating their work and provide some words of encouragement.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Burrell, recently you use storytelling, like in regards to your personal journey into the classroom, and you created a really strong connection with a student that has a disability, right? And you were able to help her not only complete a doctorate, but also publish, right? Can you elaborate and provide that example to the rest of us?
Yeah, so I had a doctoral student at an institution I worked at. She's legally blind. She had a service dog, but she had a whole host of medical conditions that would cause her to be in and out of class. It's the whole reason why she had to take more of a hybrid degree. And in this particular program, classes met 1 weekend a month, 4 times a semester on a Saturday and Sunday. She came in my class and immediately, I could just tell through interaction that she was kind of in the corner because she was used to coming to class and just being ignored. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was really engage her and allow her to be heard. So, I encouraged her respond to different things and share perspective. And what I really found out was, even though she was shy, and I think she felt apprehensive about having a disability, she was actually brilliant. But because she came with a service dog and because she needed reasonable accommodations, people came to some stigmatized assumption, other faculty members, that, this is a problem student or this is a lot of extra work for me, when I really engaged her because her contributions added to the class. So we connected in that class, and the next semester she was really ill and she said, I'm not going to be able to come even on those weekend sessions because I've got to get some surgery. She's like, what do you recommend I stay on track? I said, well, why don't you take an independent study class with me so you stay enrolled, and then we'll work on something independently. And what I did was I set up a class for her to work on a literature review and other things that eventually became components of her dissertation. But I gave her pieces to put together where when she got done, the final deliverable on that class became an academic article that we co-published with her as a first author and me as a second. And I think that experience built her confidence that gave her the momentum to really move forward with her doctorate and her research. And so literally 2 months before she was supposed to defend, she told me, she said, my doctor's giving up on me. She's telling my family to go seek hospice. And I said, well, find another doctor. And we talked it through. And so she found another doctor, and 2 months later, she defended her dissertation and graduated. But it's just me being a person of color and knowing what it's like to be kind of in the corner or ostracized or marginalized when I was a young child, you know, I have a certain level of sympathy and empathy towards others that are different from me. And so I naturally reached out and engaged with her, because for me as a young person of color, being in schools as the only Black male in the classroom, I would have appreciated if someone would have done that for me. And so that's the way I kind of engage her and engage all my students that come from different backgrounds and different cultures and different places.
You know, the example you provided and how you provided, you mentioned the word empathy, right? And empathy is a powerful tool that's in the DEI toolbox, right? That we often overlook. And it's important to use empathy, I would say, right away, right? And the reason why is often we try to explain ourselves and we try to share our story or our perspective when a problem is happening, right? So we become reactive, and then students question our motive, right? Are we only sharing this now because there's a problem, right? Think of all like the protests that are happening on campuses, and you have academic presidents and administrators coming out saying, hey, I understand you. I know what you're going through. This is my experience. This is my background. And students start questioning that because they see it as being reactive, right? As being an opportunity of you sharing your lived experience only when you notice that I have a problem. But by engaging students right away, by sharing your personal experiences, you create that meaningful connection right away that helps to create this understanding of empathy in the classroom between you and the students with other classmates. Now, Terrence, Dr. Duncan, you also have brought in guest lectures from many industries, right? And many of us, you know, we work in small community colleges, state schools, and we don't have that budget, you know, to bring in those amazing guest lectures to share those stories. Now, what type of things have you done to get those people to come to your classroom and engage with your students, whether or not, you know, sending you this invoice with, you know, with 6 digits behind their budget?
Well, I mean, I'm still trying to pay back you and Dr. Burrell for attending some of my lectures and stuff. So, I mean, the budget's a little bit tight, but good question. So what I do is that I just try to have people that could come in that's willing to donate their time, be able to share their experiences. You'll be amazed how many people are willing to share their experiences and not necessarily be tied to an invoice to the students. And again, I think it provides a level of relatability. And I think that students really appreciate that. I don't know what it would be like 10 years ago, because I've been teaching for about a little bit over 5 years now. But I do know that for the older adult learners, I think they would prefer to have somebody that they could relate to in corporate America or something of that nature, maybe a subject matter expert in a particular industry, even if they're not in the particular industry in itself. So by being able to have them come in there and just discuss on whatever the topic that may be, I think students are more engaging than compared to maybe someone, you know, I mean, it would be nice to have somebody with a 6-figure, you know, like a John Calipari or somebody that Barack Obama or something like that, right? But I think that to be able to have something that still provides at the same essence of, like Dr. Burrell said, of empathy and relatability, I think those are some of the key traits that you would like to incorporate for your classroom style lectures.
You know, the relatability is critical, right? I mean, obviously, I would love to, you know, to be in a classroom with Barack Obama, but when it comes to students and them trying to find themselves career-wise, academically, and also academically, having a person that's from their community, you know, that look like them, that came from very similar backgrounds, that's often more inspiring because it's tangible, right? And they also can connect with that person, you know, network with that person afterwards. Now, Dr. Burrell, we talked about weaving storytelling and curriculum, right? And you've been doing this for a while, right? So a few decades, without telling your age to everybody. How do you know how much storytelling to, you know, to intertwine into curriculum so that it doesn't become overwhelming, or is there such a thing, like, is there such a thing as too much storytelling? And then what type of storytelling tools, you know, we mentioned case studies, we mentioned guest lectures, what other stuff would you recommend faculty to explore?
So, so I'm kind of an interdisciplinary scholar. So I've taught in a variety of different instances, from business to leadership to healthcare. And so one of the things that I think is important is how I leverage case studies is, I'll have a final research paper in a graduate class. And what I'll do is I'll give them a real life scenario and ask them to play either individually in groups, like they're consultants and they need to fix this problem. And so some of the cutting edge things I did was, a year ago, you work in an organization, a healthcare organization, and your Asian American employees are being bullied by patients and coworkers over COVID-19 and saying they're responsible. So do some research on workplace bullying, do some research on psychological safety in the workplace, and come up with a solution from the literature. Along with that, they had a case to talk about invisible disabilities. So there's research out there that says that 30% of the workers in your workplace have some kind of invisible disability. It's easy for you to see someone with a cane or a walker or a wheelchair. There are a lot of people with mental health issues like anxiety, ADHD, depression, that they don't disclose to their employers, but they're still navigating. And telework and not being around the office and socializing made it worse for some people. So I created a scenario based off of that, and I had teams go out. One of the real issues in the workplace we haven't been able to deal with is, pregnancy discrimination and the gender discrimination that women face in a variety of different environments. And so one of the things I did was, gave up a situation where a hospital and health system has this series of large lawsuits on gender equity and pay equity. And one of the main issues is pregnancy discrimination, where these women have been, careers have stalled because they've chosen to have a family, and go out and do research on that. And so by bringing current events, real life issues in the classroom, I'm having people talk about diversity, where maybe the class was just a leadership in healthcare class. But by including that case study in there, now I'm having them discuss things that you might have to deal with as a healthcare leader, or as a business leader, or as a high-tech leader in your workplace, by challenging them, by making that an assignment where they've got to go out and research and work in a team and expose themselves to that. So those are just some small examples of things I've done.
No, those are actually really good examples, right? Because we go beyond staying in the class, but creating scenarios, right? Almost like simulations, like real simulations, and using storytelling to kind of direct students how to apply these tools that they are learning in the classroom. What about you, Dr. Duncan?
I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that as we are addressing diversity, that we always have to be mindful of bias. And even as instructors, that we have bias at a certain extent, and we have to be comfortable in addressing our bias before we're able to address our students. And so one thing that I try to do with my students often is especially depending on the responses or even during the interactions, I'll ask them a question that's not a close-end question. They have to really expound and elaborate. And depending on the assignment and the activity, I will have them research something that's contrary to what they're comfortable doing. So there's always a phrase that I like to use. You guys hear me say it all the time. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think the only way that you can really learn through diversity, not the only, but one of the ways to learn about diversity is to look at the other, to develop a more holistic view. And so, excuse me. By developing a more holistic view, then I think the student might, expand their awareness a little bit more, not only just on an academic standpoint, but when they go out there in the industry, because most of our learners at the, graduate and the doctoral level, they're currently working, right? So we want to make sure, or I would like to make sure that they are understanding that, when we're doing this case study, okay, that's fine for a particular grade, but let me give you something to think about the next time that you go to work, or if you run into a situation. And so we have a lot of discussions in the healthcare space about COVID-19 and staffing shortages and things like that. But, one of the things that I try to encourage them to look at is the social determinants of health, because if they understand the social determinants of health, especially as it relates to minorities, then I think it kind of gives them a better perspective in addressing some of the healthcare related problems, which is why healthcare continues to be one of the largest expenditures of GDP in the United States, which exceeds the military.
You said the word biases, right? I think that's something we often overlook. Like we look at the biases of maybe our students and maybe the university, the institution we work in, the history and context. But sometimes we need to reflect on our own biases and how that impacts our own teaching style, right, and instruction. But it also means that we have to prep our guest lectures, right,
Yes.
and kind of prepare them to share their stories in the classroom. And then we as faculty need to really examine if they are biases, maybe ahead of time, or have the discussion to kind of get that stuff out, just to make sure any negative things don't come out during the classroom. Now in regard, so going back to you, Dr. Duncan, when you bring guest lectures, and you also teach online, so how does that change and shift when you are bringing guest lectures to share their professional background or their personal background, whether it's in classroom or it's online? How does that differ, and how do you prepare those kind of different situations?
Well, it's interesting, that we're talking about storytelling. I think you got to have a conversation with your guest lecturer. And I think that, if you have that conversation with your potential guest lecturer, I think you have a pretty good idea as to, their approach that they're going to have as far as speaking to your students, whether it be virtual or online. I think you also get a good gauge about where they're going to be. So, a lot of times off camera, people sometimes we use colorful language, or maybe, their true, thoughts and words may come out. And I think that when you're able to see that, then you can probably set up parameters prior to them going to the guest lecture, especially if you already committed them to do it, or you just put some guidelines, say, okay, well, we're just going to stay within this particular scope of the conversation, and just be able to have more of a Q&A. But I just think that bringing in different unique perspectives, regardless, even if it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, is very important stuff, because even though that I may not personally view with certain viewpoints or a particular style, that doesn't mean that somebody else might benefit from that particular lecturing style too. So again, it's just more checking my own personal biases, when I'm dealing with guest lecturers, or even vetting them before they come to the class.
How about you, Dr. Burrell? How do you prepare your guest lecturers when they come to class to share their stories?
I think you need to have a meeting with them up front. I try to give them questions up front. These are the things that I'm going to talk about, to try to keep them on an agenda. And then I think the whole thing that's important is, you don't just want them to tell their war stories about what they did, but I think you also want to remind them what the content of the class is. Because you'll have some people that'll ramble on with the story, and they'll be talking, and then students will be looking, you'll see those faces on Zoom, and then the faces move, and then the cameras turn off, and then that they're really checked out when because you haven't really provided parameters of, these are the things that I want to focus on, and these are the things I want you to do in advance. And part of the reason why I want to give you things in advance, so when I'm talking to you and I'm having questions, you're not pausing so much, because you kind of gotten cues ahead of time of what we're going to talk about, or the areas I want to go. And there's certain things that we know personally about each other, if you're bringing someone that you know personally, that you think is really important for them to tell that point, that if you don't tell them, hey, I really want you to talk about this, they might not talk about it. And so your class, and their interests, some things a little bit more than your guest speaker. So by having kind of that agenda and those questions up front, you can really make sure that their engagement is really focused and concise when they come in your classroom.
Often we forget the importance of the preparation, right? The legwork that we have to do in preparing both the students, the guest lecturer, and ourselves in regards to how to integrate this story into the classroom, but also how it's relevant to that learning topic that we're covering, that subject matter, that learning objective we're trying to hit, right? So it means that we have to do our own homework, right? That it's not just a filibuster, as Dr. Burrell mentioned, that you're just bringing someone in for a good hour and they're just basically filibustering that hour. We want to prepare students. We might want to say, hey, I'm bringing in Dr. Duncan. He comes with 10 years of executive experience in healthcare field. He focused on risk management. This is bio, this is background. Have questions ready, right? So you're kind of preparing them ahead of time. They have questions ready. They look this person up, and they are participating in that lived experience when that person share their story. So it's not just a lecture. It's not just someone on the podium providing instruction, right? Instead, they are sharing their story, and like a really good story, you are going on this journey with them, right? You are prepared to go on this journey with them, and you can connect yourself with time, with dates, with places, right? With those experiences the person is sharing, that makes this more of a meaningful opportunity, right? A meaningful network between that student and your guest lecture. Dr. Burrell, you mentioned including case studies and simulations and exercises in the classroom. Do you create these case studies, or you purchase them? Like, and how do you weave those more traditional tools to really connect better with the students in regards to making it more inclusive?
Normally, I don't purchase a case study. I mean, really what I'm truly trying to do, and I think we all agree with this, is you want your class to be engaging, because people are coming to your class, and yeah, they might be coming because they need to get a degree, but we still need to recognize and realize you're taking time away from your kids, your significant others, something else you could be doing. So the last thing I want my class to be like is like I'm going for surgery without anesthesia, right? I never want my class to be painful. I want them to say, you know what, this is time well spent. As for the case studies, I don't purchase. I use a lot of current events. I spend a lot of times on Pew Research because they have a lot of things on cultural things and trends that are happening. USA Today has great articles, New York Times, Washington Post. And what I do is I take those articles and those real life scenarios and take a snippet of that or that situation and kind of build something around that. And what's cool about that is these are things that are happening in real time that you can build discussions. Like for me and my discussion board, I moved away from just putting static questions on there, and I put TED Talks on there. Because even if it's asynchronous, they're not talking to you, they can watch a TED Talk and it almost functions like a lecture. And then I'm having them respond to the TED Talk. But what I'm doing is telling them in their response, they have to use references and apply it to terms and context from the course text. So I don't want them to watch a TED Talk and then tell me exactly what they saw. I want them to tell me the implications of what they saw and then tell me a concept, a model, a theory from the textbook that applies to those implications or applies to what they saw. And it makes the discussion board weekly activities come to life a little bit more than if I ask a static question and it just sat there. And so those are some of the things that I do. Obviously, you don't have a limited amount of money. We worked as adjuncts in other places. It's just all about being creative ways to try to engage students in a different way.
Yeah, that's a good point, because often some of these case studies, especially those Harvard case studies, are like 30 pages long. That in itself is intimidating and is not, inclusive, right? It's not equitable. And like the expense wise is definitely not equitable. So yeah, I think what you mentioned is kind of thinking outside the box. Things that we don't often think about as case studies are easily transferable to be case studies. It's how we present them, it's how we share them in the class. What about you, Dr. Duncan? What other storytelling tools that you use in the classroom that maybe other teachers should be looking at?
Yeah, similar to what Dr. Burrell said, I'm actually going to start taking his TED Talks idea, but I like to use like the Brookings Institute. I like to use like different policy think tanks, depending on what the subject matter is about, and be able to incorporate that into the actual discussion board. And then also when I'm looking at the students' posts, instead of just having the same standard question or response to ask the student, I will actually try to pick out maybe a sentence or two, depending on the response length, because they actually have the requirements. And then I may counter it with some research, depending on their response, and then ask them to respond to that as well. I don't usually do too much YouTube videos because I know there's a lot of marketing and ads involved and stuff. I know it drives me crazy personally, but I just think that, bringing in different perspectives outside the text, I think the text is a good foundation, right? But I think that it's very important for us to use a combination of, resourceful information, whether it be from academic journals, whether it's from policy think tanks, whether it's a current topic or a trending topic, and incorporate that into the overall discussion. So I remember when the George Floyd protests were going on, I was able to weave that into the conversation. I know that it was some interesting responses, but I think that, those type of the conversations have to be held. Some of those conversations, they would probably make some people feel uncomfortable, but those things have to occur, right? And then also too, just, like my natural appearance when I come into lectures and things like that, I want them to see and I want them to acknowledge the bias, straight out, flat out when they first see me or my picture or whatever the case may be. And then let's engage in the conversation, because as we continue throughout these terms or semesters, they're able to really, recognize like, hey, you know what? I thought of Dr. Duncan as probably being this one type of guy, but then at the end, he was a great instructor because he made me, see the world in a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Now we're down to our last 10 minutes. I want to be able to give opportunity to those attending to ask questions. But before I do that, when it comes to storytelling, especially from the professor side, right? And if you're new to it, or when we talk about biases and things that we have been trained and taught, we often come from a traditional background of not sharing too much, right? That this is a classroom environment and you're supposed to teach and not share about yourself, right? And even when we come from industries, we are taught to not make it personal, right? Stop sharing too much about yourself, right? Don't bring the stuff that's happening at your house to the workplace, and that prevents that meaningful connection, right? So in regards to our attendees, and those people that are maybe intimidated to sharing their story or hesitant, what type of what would you say to them, right? What advice would you give them to help prepare them or nudge them to share their own stories and to weave storytelling more into the curriculum? Dr. Burrell.
So I think the thing is, the real important thing is you got to be able to read the room, right? And so political savvy is very, very important. I also think, you can't, as long as you're coming into class and you're on some kind of ivory tower, I think that's where the train goes off the track, right? So if you come there and you realize, hey, these people are just as successful in their own way, in their own place, it's just, they don't have a doctorate like me, so I'm going to learn as much from them as they're going to learn from me. I think that's where you start. And then I just think, by having exercises where you're asking students, what do they want to do? What do they want to get out of this class? As a first discussion where I normally have an introduction, tell me your background, tell me why you're doing this program, tell me what you want to do when you get done. I think that provides a roadmap to the kind of stories that I can tell, cater to those responses to those questions. And to me, that's more about reading the room and meeting students where they are and engaging them where they are.
Thank you. Dr. Duncan.
Just real quickly, just so people have a time to ask questions if they want. I think that encouraging the responses to be as organic as possible. Don't give me the fluff, like I would say off camera, let's keep it real, Now, obviously, we want to make sure that we want to keep, the particular controls to ensure that we're not, offending anybody or triggering anybody and stuff. But I think that sometimes some students, they may get into this point where they want to provide this high level academic answer, and it doesn't really reflect who they are as a person. So I think that, through the storytelling and just encourage them to be able to support or state what they feel, but always make sure that they back it up by research. That's one of my biggest criteria. Say what you say, feel what you feel, but make sure that you back it up to research, because then that gives them the opportunity to tell their story. Whether it's right or wrong, it's always debatable, but I just think you got to keep it real. And I think that the more that you encourage that with your students, I think the students really appreciate it. And so it makes me think about another school. You got to teach adjunct at where they're another faith-based institution more very conservative. And it's really interesting when you talk about stuff like the American Affordable Care Act and Obamacare and poverty and things like that. And so I would have, depending on what they say, I may reach out to them privately and say, okay, well, I understand that may be how you feel, but let's find a different way of going about saying it. Again, I think that really helps them check their bias, because maybe somebody's never told them in corporate America, depending on where they're coming from, especially rural America, that, such statements or comments may not be appropriate. I'll never tell them that they offend me, because what people say doesn't offend me, honestly. I just think that just being organic and then just being able to have that dialogue is really important for just the overall learning experience on top of everything else that we do as instructors.
Thank you. Thank you. So someone said that music, that we forgot to mention music. No, definitely music is a powerful tool when it comes to storytelling. I teach entrepreneurship, and one of my favorite rappers is Jay-Z, so I use both his music, his lines, and embed it into the classroom when it talks about when we're focused on entrepreneurship. It often also dates me because the kids are like, we don't listen to Jay-Z anymore. So it does create that connection. Right. So next one we have here, looking at triggers. Definitely, we have to really kind of assess those stories, and also mention that there could be triggers to the class to kind of like prepare them. Like this person's story is difficult. They overcome, great adversity. So there's some difficulties there. And if you feel triggered, please feel free to leave the classroom. Come back when you're ready. And then if you are willing to, let's share your feelings, right? Your own, what you are thinking of, right? So it creates also learning opportunities in both ways, but definitely don't push those stories, at someone if they're not ready for it. Okay.
A recommendation that I would say, Dr. Rahim, is for those, if you have the ability and the time, is to get out in your local, especially if you're in the business field, the local chamber of commerces, because I think that it's really interesting to see where the bias really exists. It's interesting to hear some of the comments or some of the statements that they may say, and they're not in the academic genre. So I think that when you take those, qualitative experiences and bring them to the classroom, I think that really shapes how you're going to approach teaching a class too, because I think some of the problems, and you've heard me talk about this before several times, I think some of the bigger problems is that once we get too locked in academia, that we kind of, pull away from the real world situations, real world scenarios. So if you are an instructor on this particular program, then yeah, I would encourage you to just get out in the business community, volunteer and just, see the feedback, look at the verbal cues, the nonverbal cues, some of the stories, or feel like how disjointed the conversation may be. And you'll be amazed, just from that dialogue and engagement, not only does it make you a better person as a communicator, but also be able to communicate to your class more effectively.
Yeah, good point in regards to linear thinking, right? That, the longer we teach, we forget that there's opportunities to grow and learn and think outside the box, right? But thank you very much. It looks like these are all the questions. I think someone mentioned STEM. I found it since sharing these experiences, all to kind of grow communication and community. Good point. All right, that is everything. I hope that everyone found some some learning opportunities, some best practices. I would like to thank Dr. Terence Duncan and Dr. Dale Burrell for sharing their best practices and their own stories to the larger audience. But thank you everybody for the opportunity, and thank you very much for your continued work in the classroom in motivating and inspiring our students. Thank you everybody.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Monica Landeros. I just want to let everyone know that we're going to have a posting of this recording so that you can access it later. Please go and check out our other sessions. We're going to be on today, tomorrow, and on Friday. And thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, everybody.